human capital, and I'm sorry my co-presenter is not here, I personally detest this idea of human capital. This is a rushed and unthought through concoction of CFOs, because CFOs like to measure, so they started saying, hey, what's the best way of measuring? What's the best way of imposing a scorecard on other assets? And they started calling them human capital. I disagree. Assets deplete, humans grow. Assets are fixed, humans are dynamic. Assets are accounted for, humans break the accounting bond. Calling them capital is a disgrace. When you, let me come back and relate it to the individual aspect I was talking about. When you start thinking of a person, including yourself and your reportees, your colleagues, as capital, your mind is tuned to treat them that way, and your CFO is very happy because he can write them off anytime he wants and hire 5 more like that. And that means the beginning of the end. But when you start thinking of them as talent, then you are sowing the seeds of growth in the talent. You are enabling them. You are creating leaders of the future. This morning, one of the presenters talked about management. I don't agree that management is an art. I think I would follow with the Henry Mintzberg school, which believes that management is an art, a science, and a craft. It's all 3 things, and you have to learn all 3. If you fix yourself into the art, you don't know what is the science or what is the craft, which basically means humility, to learn from somebody. When we hire a plumber or a carpenter, that person has learned from somebody the art and the craft, not the science. So you have to learn some of the arts and craft. CEOs and senior executives of the country, and it's become an organ and an ambassador of presentation worldwide. I also want to recognize Mr. Amir Niazi, who currently is, I believe, still the president of Pakistan Society of Training and Development, which my late great father founded, and which he is running very ably. And more than that, I am among 3 people here who are examples of what I am going to talk about, where I think the growth comes from. Because I don't think growth comes from outside, it comes from inside. Let me name those 3 names because they are here, and when Ijaz told me they will be coming, I requested that my session be in the morning instead of the afternoon. One is Mr. Aga Zafar Abbas of Kansai Paints, Mr. Sirajuddin Aziz, who happens to be on the panel, and Mr. Khalid Awan, who also are on the panel. In a few minutes, I'll tell you why I'm recognizing them, which doesn't mean that I am not appreciating the presence of the others. We have discussed this morning about growth, and we have looked at growth from a macroeconomic perspective and a little bit from the organizational perspective. And I think that there are really 3 levels of growth, or 3 targets that you need to look at and evaluate with time. Foremost is individual. It is individuals who bring change. It's individuals who create and share visions. And it is individuals who deliver. Think about Quaid-e-Azam. Think about Martin Luther King. Think about Mao Zedong and the other leaders. They were not a crowd that went to them and gave them the vision. They had the vision and they led. I will not touch the organizational and societal levels because more speakers will be talking. But even in those organs, there are individuals, and those individuals are the ones who think about what can they do better, not for themselves, but for the next generation. And that time focus brings together a lot of people. Remember, all wars start on contemporary issues, and all peace comes when you think of the next generation. So one might even ask the question, why have wars? And that is what I'm not going to touch right now, but I'll go on to growth. Individuals who I'm picking up here grow through 3 methods, and that's what their learning is. Either knowledge, or skills, or attitudes. So it's the combination or the confluence of these 3 that make us better people, that make us to grow, and then we cause organizations and societies to grow. Knowledge can be taught. This morning a speaker mentioned about the pace of growth of knowledge or data out there in Google. Attitudes are not taught, they are caught. You look at a model like a prophet or a leader and you catch those attitudes. And skills are the tough thing which I think we need to really think about. When examples of Malaysia or Dubai or even the United States, where I now live, come about, it's not because they had more knowledge. And it's not because the attitude was very positive. It is because all three things, knowledge, skills, and attitudes, in Cognizance went together. And the skills is what they toiled for. We did a little survey in the United States in the days when I was with McKinsey to find out how many CEOs and board members truly develop themselves after they have been made CEOs. We were very disappointed at 17%. Let's make it 20 to be generous. This means 1 in every 5 CEOs really wants to go out there, learn something, douse himself into some activity and come out a better person, whether it is through a program, a seminar, or self-learning. The other 4 out of 5 think they know, and that's unfortunate because knowledge, as I just said, they know, is not static. On the one hand, we are saying knowledge is growing. On the other hand, the person says he knows or she knows. And you can almost predict the decline of an organization based on the CEO's own growth and development. Since this is a CEO club, and since I'm talking about individuals where I focus this attention, I want to ask each of you, how often and where did you go and get your next level of education in any area that you think about? I'm not talking about reading books or attending a half-day seminar. Real skill building. And that's where these 3 people, Agha Zafar, Sirajuddin Aziz, and Khalid Awan, actually subjugated themselves. I won't name the name of a seminar because it will look like I'm marketing, but through a very tough 5-day grueling exercise, if you resonate with me, not all of them do it. And that would be a pre-indicator or leading indicator of the growth of that organization. Because if the chief executive says, I don't know it all, I need to be better, I need to learn, and therefore I am going to have lifelong learning as my mission as an individual, others will follow suit. He doesn't have to tell what to do. Many people who I have met have followed Khalid Awan with a lot of liking. So also Agha Zafar Abbas. In fact, I had the honor of sitting with him this morning and he was asking me about some system. Is there somebody here who can do that, because you are abroad? And so he was worried about how he can take that knowledge that he learned and pass it on to his colleagues and his peers. And that, I think, is an extremely important indicator. Look at the chief executives, whether they are in companies, whether they are in government or non-profits or philanthropy, and see, are they developing? What is the latest they have learned? My guru, who I had the honor of working for a year with, Peter Drucker, used to learn something every year. He used to say, every 3 years, I redefine myself. And he did it. We used to see heaps of books in Korean. And he really mastered Korean and learned about it. Then he went to the Asian arts. Then he went to the classical music of the West. Now, these might be unrelated to a management guru or to a managing director, but that keeps the brain developing and learning that there's a lot out there. We can't be just overwhelmed with the knowledge out there and say technology, technology, technology is the answer. No, technology is an enabler at best. Think of it, you all came here in cars. Car was not your goal. Journey was your goal. A lot of people here with cameras. Camera is not their goal. Saving the memory is the goal. So this is a big test. Ask yourself around. Ask your peers. When you're sitting in CEO clubs, when you're sitting in Sin Club or wherever, ask, what did you learn the last thing? Not the last joke that you learned or a fun story or the book that you read. Where did you really evolve out and become something different? Bob Dylan used to say, he not busy being born is busy dying. And that is the reality of today, just as it was of ever. I want to touch a little bit about human capital, and I'm sorry my co-presenter is not here. I personally detest this idea of human capital. This is a rushed and unthought through concoction of CFOs, because CFOs like to measure, so they started saying, hey, what's the best way of measuring? What's the best way of imposing a scorecard on other assets? And they started calling them human capital. I disagree. Assets deplete, humans grow. Assets are fixed, humans are dynamic. Assets are accounted for, humans break the accounting bond. Calling them capital is a disgrace. When you let me come back and relate it to the individual aspect I was talking about. When you start thinking of a person, including yourself and your reportees, your colleagues, as capital, your mind is tuned to treat them that way, and your CFO is very happy because he can write them off anytime he wants and hire 5 more like that. And that means the beginning of the end. But when you start thinking of them as talent, then you are sowing the seeds of growth in the talent. You are enabling them. You are creating leaders of the future. This morning, one of the presenters talked about management. I don't agree that management is an art. I think I would follow with the Henry Mintzberg school, which believes that management is an art, a science, and a craft. It's all 3 things, and you have to learn all 3. If you fix yourself into the art, you don't know what is the science or what is the craft, which basically means humility, to learn from somebody. When we hire a plumber or a carpenter, that person has learned from somebody the art and the craft, not the science. So you have to learn some of the arts and craft, and that is why succession is a big issue in the world today. When CEOs like us do not train and develop successors, what do we find? A new industry being born of recruiters. They throw resumes and the club moves around, left, right, and center. The same CEOs move around, destroying one company after the other, or one out of the 5 that we know making a company, because that's one of the 17 or 20% minorities. Leadership is not an art and science. Leadership is a journey. Ladies and gentlemen, leadership development is not an event. When you send people to a course, you can't say, oh, you're back, now you expect it to be a better leader. Leadership is a lifelong journey. Another element of growth, are we growing leaders? And my definition of a leader is not, or the recognition of a leader is not who has more followers. It's very easy to buy followers or convince followers or be charismatic, impress people. There are multiple ways of doing that. A leader does not create followers. That is a dependency syndrome for individuals. Leaders create more leaders. So when you are 6 feet under the ground, there are people out there in whom you have built your ilk, and they have gone farther than you, and you have respected them. And that, to me, is the ultimate of growth. Last, you will see some handouts being passed out. I was honored to be included in Drucker's last book on the chapter called The Leader Integrator. We have taken permission to print a few copies. You will get those from Mr. Roshan Ali. Also, just recently, in fall 2014, my article on metaphors for leaders has been published in the Leader to Leader journal, and I'm proud to say that Leader to Leader journal is highest ranked leadership journal in the world, higher than Harvard Business Review. And that article is called Meeting Metaphors. And what I'm trying to say over there is how we really can create a future using metaphors. And there are some metaphor explanations, and over 7 years I have observed boards and chief executives and C-suites using or abusing metaphors. So I've shared that. There's a whole book coming on that, but those are 8 pages. So good luck to you in your individual. You have come here individually, and you need to now think about your growth and development, because that undoubtedly will spur multiple growths. Don't look outside. Look at yourself. hopefully you will consider management as a combination, as a confluence of art, science, and craft so that you can get equal emphasis on those. And hopefully you will think knowledge, skills, and attitudes need to be treated differently. Just by giving a book or conducting a seminar based on a book you read is just knowledge passing. It's not skill building. And attitude calibration is a totally different thing. When Dr. Ishrat was talking about how we should be positive, he was basically talking about one of the elements of learning, which is attitude recalibration. And attitudes, again, are very torturous. They come with more the recency effect, what just happened to us. And I go back to 1971, when my dear father and we were sitting around our dining table and weeping in December because East Pakistan had gone. And in very innocent ways, we were asking in Urdu, Abbu, ab kya hoga? Abbu, ab kya hoga? And he was saying, just think what has happened, because he fought for the country. And next generation destroyed it and broke it into half. Again, it was what was here. It was the attitudes of those stupid Bengalis and we, the superior Westerners. It was not about knowledge and skills. It was the attitude issue, which we did not inculcate. So please, when you go home, think about your knowledge base, your skill base, your attitude orientation. Think also about leadership as an ongoing journey and creating more leaders. That is where you will multiply the growth rather than going after them and telling them, you better be leader. They're looking at you. 2 eyes of mine are looking this way, but at least 100 eyes are looking at me right now. And that is where the attitudes are caught rather than taught. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Outstanding, as expected, Mr. Ghani. Really appreciate the perspective and helping us think along vistas, which we normally don't do. I would like to now request Mr. Sirajuddin, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Habib Metropolitan. Along with being a very distinguished banker, what impresses me the most about him is the fact that he is a Renaissance man. He will share with us a perspective which has a lot to do with literature. He's a gentleman of letters. And I think when you have gentlemen of letters who lead organizations, it makes such a difference in the quality of the organization and the results that we get. Mr. Sirajuddin.
Am I audible? Yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een. To Thee we worship and Thy help we seek. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What should I speak on? My co-panelists have covered the subject so beautifully and articulated upon it. What would you like me to dwell upon? Something scandalous? Yeah, see, that brings the cheer on your face. I'm impressed by the introduction you made of me. What has happened is that you have suddenly taken the bar of expectation of the audience to a different level, and the disappointment that they're going to suffer at my hands is something that I'll have to contend with. Ladies and gentlemen, the subject at hand was inclusion for growth. I'll try and stick to the subject as best as I can. What is happening in Pakistan particularly is that we have a set of macro determinants and we have a set of micro determinants. There is obviously a greater focus on the macro determinants. Where is the GDP heading? What is the tax to GDP ratio? What is the investment ratio to GDP? These are the elements that we are constantly talking of. What are the foreign exchange reserves of the country? We look at the macro picture. Now the macro picture has to ultimately someday, hopefully, translate into a micro picture. For those of you who have had the privilege of being children during the Ayyub era, as I was, there was this cliché word used of 22 families ruling Pakistan. Now, I don't know if there was anything wrong for those 22 families to have been ruling Pakistan. It was perfectly fine. And I'd like you to hold that thought for a moment and take you and transport you out into what Dr. Ishrat Hussain alluded to this morning, a country called the South Korea. South Korea, about the same time, i.e. 1962-63, when President Ayub was initiating his reforms, there was a coup that took place in South Korea, and Park Chung-hee became the president of South Korea. At that point in time, the per capita income of Pakistan was $85, and the per capita income of South Korea was $45. They believed also that there should be few people who should be entrusted the task of running the economy. And ultimately, between the period, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, there were only 18 chaebols, as they call them, or conglomerates in English, which built up Korea into getting admission as part of the OECD. In the same span of years, what did we do? We thought that there is concentration of capital taking place in the hands of 22, without realizing that for an economic reason, this has to happen. The capital formation must take place because ultimately it gets translated into micro capital formation. But until and unless you allow that to happen, it will never transcend itself or descend upon the micro constituents of any economy, i.e. the people of the country. Now, I wanted to start off my presentation or my conversation with you as an audience by first acknowledging Mr. Ejaz Nisar for having brought up this amazing conference here, and I think it's 8th year in succession, an unsolicited advice that I wish to give as part of my dialogue on the subject that we have at hand. Abandon the CEO's forum for the next 3 years. Construct instead a leaders forum. Get all the politicians into this room and ask them to assemble and formulate an economic vision for the country. Ladies and gentlemen, tell me one country, name me one country which has progressed in the last 50 years without a leader. They have progressed by themselves. They have just germinated out of nothing. No, it doesn't happen that way. A lot of names have been mentioned by my co-panelists of people who have led their countries. Why? Because they had an economic vision. Capital concentration that was allowed by President Ayub was perfectly fine, and it would have ultimately filtered itself down to the lowest level of the society. But we prevented that from happening. I'll give you a classic example. Gorbachev thought similarly, and immediately started implementing dispersion of capital. What did he end up with? Breaking up the evil empire, as the US would call it then, into 13 republics. Dismemberment of the country. Why? Because he went for a political reform, ignoring entirely the economic side of things. And here we have an octogenarian, 80 years plus, called Deng Xiaoping, who believes that there is a need to embark on an economic reform after having limited the country of not being open to foreign knowledge, investment or anything for a good 35 years after its independence. He embarks upon testing capitalism in small areas of People's Republic of China by creating what is now popularly known as the special economic zones. He tested them, they performed exceedingly well, and he did it with a sense, a vision, a directive in his mind that he had of how he would like to build the special economic zones. For those of you who are familiar with the topography and the geography of the area, if China has a South China to it, bordering the Yellow Sea, he created special economic zones, one which is called Shenzhen, which was facing Hong Kong. He created another special economic zone called Xiamen, which faced Taiwan. He created another special economic zone called Zhuhai, which faces Macau, which was a Portuguese territory then. So he had planned exactly how he wanted investment to come into those special economic zones because of the natural historical linkages of these geographic locations with those cities inside China. They're all Fukienese who live in Taiwan. So it was very easy for them to be able to go back to their villages and to their hometowns and build up factories. Today, South China is the factory of the world. What is it? It's vision, leadership, quality of leadership that will allow. Now, I think a lot has been mentioned about human capital, and I think Mr. Usman Ghani, who was so kind in expressing his sentiments about me, I don't deserve those, but thank you very much, Mr. Ghani, mentioned about human capital being not human capital, and he said he detests the idea of calling humans as capital. Let me try and deliberate a little bit on that aspect and tell you that if you think that the CFOs are responsible for it, so be it. But what has happened is that while everybody recognizes human capital as asset in their minds, they have conveniently moved it from the right side of the balance sheet to the left side, which is a liability. Capital is always a liability. It is never an asset. So let's be very clear of what we are looking at. It is so romantic for Pakistani politicians to be talking about human capital, and they say we have a population which is 35% youth, 65% youth, below the age of 30. Okay, so what do we do with it? We don't know. Oh, is it that they all arrived last night into their 28th year and their 29th year? Certainly not. What were the economic managers doing about it? Were they preparing the nation for handling and harnessing this potential that's going to unleash itself? What do we have now? We have distress, we have unemployment, both real and disguised. So, leadership at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, is something that will take the country or land of opportunities or no opportunities. It is the leadership that will create the opportunity. Who would have thought 40 years back that Singapore is a land of opportunity? Has absolutely zero natural resources, has absolutely no access to anything. Even the water gets from Malaysia. So if the Malaysians were to turn off the taps, they will all be deprived of water. The management skill of a single individual who had a vision, Lee Kuan Yew. And he took the nation where it had to be taken. If we are going to look at Pakistan, and if we are going to look at Pakistan as patriots, then let's look at ourselves introspectively. Let's look at the mirror every day and realize that we are not the lions that we talk we are. Okay? We need to appreciate, we need to recognize the fact that we as individuals, if we fail in our responsibility to be able to pay taxes to the country that we live in, it's a dismal low of 9.2% to the GDP. The geographic region where Pakistan is located, it is averaging 15.5%. Even Bangladesh is better than us, even India is better than us. So where do we stand? We need to harness, we need to bring the people onto a common platform. And that's the reason, Mr. Nisar, I said, get the politicians to sign an economic charter, not a political charter of expediency and conveniences for each other. It would not help anybody. Running an organization, running a micro-organization within an economy is possibly a very easy task. It's not very difficult. It is only when you're talking of, somebody spoke about followers. My lamentation always has been, as a Pakistani, that we have 180 million followers. No, we have 180 million leaders with zero following. That is the dilemma, that's the issue that we have. So we need to look at that. For anything to be progressive in nature, where the economic benefits of an economic policy were to filter down to the microest level in the economy, for that you need to have a proper vision. And I emphasize, vision can only be given by either a set of people, but it has to be pushed by a single individual called the leader. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Siraj Sahab. That was outstanding. I think we've had a fairly rich start to our discussion about inclusive growth. What we would like to do now is just go through some of the overarching principles related to inclusive growth. And the first one that I'd like to ask the panelists is, how do we turn knowledge into growth and employment? Now, we've touched on that as we've gone along in one way or another. We've heard bits and pieces, and I'd like for us now to really hone in and focus some key principles, and that is, how do we convert knowledge? And we've talked about the knowledge economy. We've spoken about the transition of the knowledge economy very rapidly in the more developed world, the OECD, perhaps more so than the developing countries. But at this stage, I'd like for us to, if you would kindly share, just a fact for context. By 2030, 65% of the GDP will be related to emerging and developing economies. And from what we've heard this morning, clearly is aligned, and if 60 to 65% is towards emerging economies, we clearly need to start addressing that as soon as practicable. Mr. Wan, please, your thoughts.
I think knowledge into growth and employment, basically, I think what we need to do is, and what is already happening in business, is that there's been a revaluation being done of where does the real value lie in businesses. And since we're talking in a business context, the most valuable businesses in the world today, as you would realize, are not asset-based. The largest businesses in the world are based on intellectual properties, are based on the quality of innovation, and most of all, they are not perhaps even based on their revenues sometimes. They are based on the perception of intelligent investors into what the potential is of those organizations. Facebook went into valuations of tens of billions of rupees, of dollars, and not having the revenues to match. The only reason why such valuations went high was because people believed of what it could do with so much traffic, with so much people, and the various possibilities that were there. So knowledge into growth and employment, definitely that is what will drive the economies, and that will drive the businesses. And as I mentioned, it is also knowledge, but it is also the challenge and the enthusiasm of the people. Again, one of the costliest, the biggest businesses in the world today, one of the largest ones, not what it used to be a few decades ago, used to be asset-based, like the big oil companies or brick-and-mortar companies. But the largest businesses of the world are, in recent times, as a business in a neighboring country, China. It just went recently on the New York Stock Exchange and was been valued in over 250 or in the range of about $250 billion. It's an internet-based company called Alibaba. And the founder of Alibaba says that the way to value the companies is not on anything else, but how he values the companies is the employees, the people who are working, with what passion and enthusiasm they go to work. So, and that passion and enthusiasm comes of a knowledge, of a certain knowledge. And the most important knowledge in business is knowledge of your customer. And not even industry, what does the customer really want, and how can you fulfill, how can you create an experience that is extraordinary. So that is how I think knowledge will shape growth and employment.
Thank you, Mr. Wan. That was very good. Could I ask Mr. Siddiqui to share his perspective, please?
I think, obviously, briefly, I would say that the statement is correct that, through knowledge, there is employment and growth. You train people, if they're trained well, it leads to better employment. You go to good university, and before you're actually graduated, you get a lot of offers. So, it does turn into employment. Similarly, like I was telling in my talk that, if you work for a good institution, you get well trained, opportunities open up. So again, it leads to growth.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ghani, if you could share your context, please.
I think this is a very apt question. You are asking knowledge to growth. First of all, we have to look at knowledge. That's the first thing. Second, what growth are we looking at? And third, the mechanism of translation of knowledge to growth. So there are three areas to look at. I personally think that knowledge has to be re-evaluated very frequently because the decay in knowledge is exponential. So we need to understand, can we leapfrog into tomorrow's knowledge today and build something rather than copycatting or benchmarking those who have already used and perhaps exhausted the best of the knowledge in IP or any other structure. So that goes back to what kind of schools and colleges and training institutions you are building today, which will later on translate into growth. Next, we have to talk about what kind of growth we are looking at, because we are going from here to there. Before we define the path, we need to know what's there. Otherwise, it'll be like a weak power that never greets us. And I think there again is what Mr. Sirajuddin Aziz very appropriately gave two examples, worldwide examples, of how you're building your long-term focus as a nation. And that goes straight to the politicians, as you said, and who we elect and what do they think about, what kind of telescope they have. Are they long-focused or short-focused or just medium-focused? And who's going to benefit from this? Now it comes to the mechanism in the middle, and I think that we already have a very good example, and I'm going to use the word experimentation. Alibaba, Amazon, all these experimented 10 times, failed, and then the 11th time they were successful. This happens a lot in software business. You write code, it doesn't work, and that's the fun of it. So we in Sialkot started this business ages ago. When I was a kid, I was told that we should be proud of the sports goods as well as the surgical goods that we export. And I was surprised when a year ago, before this, the Sialkot airport had issues, an American company came to me and said that they want to talk about quality. Would you like to come along with us? I said, wow. So they have now mass commoditized what they're doing. Now they're thinking about the next level of value adding. But of course, the events took the worst turn, and so we didn't do that. Second is moving away from problem solving to opportunity identification. If we get engrossed in problems all the time and say, okay, we don't need to solve them, by the way, but that's a different faculty. What we need to do is, what's the opportunity here that is knocking at the door? People who make forecasts for their companies, CEOs, who make 5% or 10% better than inflation rate, are just living a minimalist life. Sure, they're doing well. Sure, the stock is going well. The brand name is okay. But they're not looking at what the market opportunity is, where they can literally leapfrog. And that is where Koreans were extremely smart. I'm reminded of LG, where the LG CEO said, and it's quoted in my metaphor thing, I don't want to capture the entire market. All I want is that every American home should have at least one appliance from LG. And they're building on it. If you talk to their janitor in Korea, he will tell you, we will be in every American home by 2030. That's their vision. And they're working at it. They're not showing off much about it. Finally, allowing honest mistakes. In this part of the world, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we sort of snatch the very first time somebody makes an honest mistake. By trial and error. It's called trial and error. Let error be part of the trial. And we just catch somebody in the middle and say, this didn't work, and we jump to something else without the gestation period of seeing a solution. I'm reminded of 1973 when Abdullah Feroz was sitting with me in an attic room I used to have, and I was running a science and technology organization for students. And he was running something called The Characters, which was a social organization for young people. And I was consulting him. The two mini CEOs were sitting and talking about their pranks, and I said, this happened and that happened. And he gave me one image, which is still in front of me. I don't know if those of you who remember a 4NI, it used to be called Chavanni. He put it on the table, and he said, it should move little every day. Even if a Chavanni progress you have made, you must make progress. The opportunity is there. Don't get embroiled in problems. And I think that attitude, I was talking about attitude, will bring about the translation of the knowledge to the growth. Allow the mistakes to happen. How many times we sow the seeds of flowers and fungus catches them or termites come in there? We remove them. We just walk away from there. How many times the Apollo mission failed and yet they landed on the moon? So that would be my answer.
Outstanding. Thank you, sir. Siraj Saab, your perspective, please.
Very quickly and hopefully a crisp one. We're talking about knowledge economy and we're talking about growth. Knowledge. The best comment I heard or I read in an interview of a chairman of a Dutch multinational company, he was asked that, how do you find such wonderful talent for your company? What do you look for? And he responded and made a one-liner remark. He said, when I'm interviewing people, I hire them for their attitude, never for their skills. Skills are impartable, attitudes are most difficult to build up. Okay. Now, knowledge. For example, today Pakistan possesses knowledge that 2030, 2040, that decade is when Europe, particularly Western Europe, is going to face a major crisis of an aging population. It will be difficult for them to be running their industries. They will need much labor. Are we prepared for it? Okay. This knowledge is available globally to everybody. Look at our neighbor India. Are they preparing themselves? They are preparing themselves exceedingly well. They are training their youth into various languages. There are special programs being conducted for people who will learn French, who will learn Italian, who will learn German, largely to be able to transport and migrate this labor force there when needed. Preparation. Having knowledge is insufficient. Knowledge coupled with necessary moves, which again must be visionary in nature, are critically important for knowledge to breed any economic well-being. India today offers the cheapest medical facility for heart surgery, open heart surgery. So you get all the Europeans and sometimes even across the Atlantic people coming and getting themselves operated in India. South of India, a city called Bangalore, and a city close to Bangalore, which is a sub-city of Bangalore, which is called Vellore, has got the best liver transplant hospital in the world. That's knowledge which is deriving economic benefits and also contributing to human development. Ladies and gentlemen, all a matter of how the thought process is there in the mind of the people who are formulating your policy. Thank you.
This has been an absolutely brilliant discussion. Please join me in giving our distinguished panelists, Mr. Awan, Mr. Siddiqui, Mr. Ghani, and Siraj Saab, a big hand, please.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Now I would like to request Mr. Jawad Qureshi, CEO KKT, to please come on stage to present awards and mementos to our respected speakers. Thank you, sir. So we'll just keep ourselves center stage a little bit. To Mr. Khalid Nawaz Awan. Please look into the camera. सामने देखिएगा सर. To Mr. Sirajuddin Aziz. जी, Mr. Sirajuddin Aziz.